If you're traveling to Japan, you're probably wondering about Japan travel safety and whether or not Japan is safe. Here's a breakdown of Japan travel safety and everything you should know, as well as some tips and tricks for your time here. We help our guests customize your trips based on your interests, as well as organize different tours and experiences. If you're interested, make sure to check out the description box down below. Alright, without further ado, let's dive right in. The big question is Japan safe? In general, Japan is a very safe country. According to the Safe Cities Index 2019, created by the Economist Intelligence Unit, Tokyo has the safest overall safety score in the world, and Osaka isn't far behind in its third place. Even as a solo traveler in Japan, there are a lot of different safe ways to travel. The number of crimes in Japan is one of the lowest in the world. The most common crime in the past few years in Japan is online fraud and building fraud, where the predators make random phone calls to elderlies pretending to be their relatives to get them to wire them money. Let's break it down further a little bit and look at public transportation. First, let's talk about trains. Most people in Japan commute by trains, and you probably will too while you're here. You notice that people tend to keep to themselves on all kinds of public transportations. It's usually very quiet within train carriages and buses. People are usually looking down on their phones and barely interacting with one another. Because of the density, train stations and trains can get extremely crowded, especially during peak hours. The 23 busiest train stations in the world are all located in Japan, with 14 located inside Tokyo. Millions and millions of both local Japanese people as well as tourists go through these stations every single day. During rush hour, you'll probably feel incredibly overwhelmed and confused. Shibuya and Shinjuku are ranked number 1 and 2 of the world's busiest train stations, and they're areas that you'll probably visit and that get really crowded. What you might have seen online of people piling onto each other on trains and train station staff stuffing people like sardines into the train is quite true in certain situations. If you're not comfortable with such large, dense crowds, it's probably best to travel on public transportation outside of rush hours. During these times, make sure to hold on to your things and be mindful of your surroundings and move quickly to avoid running into people. The peak of rush hour is around 7 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. as well as 5:30 p.m. to 6 p.m. on weekdays. If you want to be comfortable on the trains and possibly even get a seat, it'd probably be best to ride the train between 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. on weekdays. Commuting by trains is generally very safe for your Japan travel, but the issue of chikan is still a huge problem in Japan. Chikan is the Japanese word for molestation, and it happens most frequently on crowded trains. Because of the nature of Japanese society, where people are expected to maintain the peace of the community, victims usually remain quiet instead of causing a scene on the train. Chikan is such a widespread problem that there are women-only train carriages, although these carriages are women-only only from the time the first train runs until 9:30 a.m. or so. Having said that, I've lived in Japan for more than 10 years, and I'm lucky that I haven't had an experience like this, but I personally know people that have had unpleasant experiences on public transportations. If you were to experience chikan or to witness chikan, make sure to report to the train master. Train masters are there to help you and will hand the person over to the police. It can be a shocking experience in the moment, and if you're not sure what to do, get off at the next stop to gather your own thoughts. Having said all of that, I'm not here to scare you, and as I said, for the most part, trains and public transportations are very safe in Japan, so just keep that in mind and you should be okay. Alright, let's talk about overnight buses. Japanese overnight buses are comfortable. Overnight buses are also available in Japan for long commutes. They're probably some of the cleanest and the most comfortable overnight buses you ever ride. There are many women-only overnight buses for you to choose from as well, although the regular overnight buses are safe and comfortable as they are. Then let's talk about taxis. Japanese taxis are comfortable. For those of you that wonder if taxis are safe, they are. Taxi drivers are very polite and professional. Most of the time, taxi drivers will keep to themselves and won't talk to you, unlike the typical friendly, chatty taxi drivers you might get in other countries. Even if you've been out drinking and you're acting a little bit or very drunk, taxi drivers are used to it. They'll likely still take you with no hesitations. If you start to feel sick in the taxi drivers usually have plastic bags for you to throw up in, or you can simply tell them to pull over. Even if you're traveling alone in the taxi, you'll most likely be safe. Let's talk about walking around at night. It is very common for people to walk around at all hours of the night. Because there are shops and restaurants that are either open 24/7 or until late, especially convenience stores, you'll see people walking around at all hours, especially in the city. If you're walking around in the city, you'll probably see other people walking around as well. The city lights keep the streets well lit and safe. If you're walking in the neighborhood areas or back alleys, it tends to be a little bit darker and less people. Just be aware of your surroundings and you'll be okay. If you're followed, approached, or made to feel uncomfortable in a certain way, head over to one of the many police boxes or police stations. If you're not sure where the police box is, head towards one of the 24-hour convenience stores. There's always someone there with a security camera installed, so you should feel relatively safe. Although there are cases of stalking in Japan, they're not that common, so it's not a major cause for concern. One thing to bear in mind in terms of public transportations is that trains and buses don't run all night in Japan, so be careful not to miss your last train, or you'll have to stay out till first train, or you'll be stranded and have to pay for an expensive taxi ride home. Japan is probably one of the countries where you can forget your phone somewhere, come back hours later and still find it sitting there and no one has touched it. If you were to forget something somewhere and go to lost and found, chances are you'll probably get it back. There have been some personal cases where I've left my phone or bags in trains, restaurants, convenience stores, and afterwards realizing and then coming back to look for them. I've been lucky to be able to retrieve them. This is definitely not to say that you should leave your things just anywhere in public. Besides the fact that you shouldn't risk losing your things, if you were to leave something behind on trains or buses, if it was handed in, you usually have to travel to the lost and found center, and that could be a hassle. Let's talk about sleeping on the trains. Japan is so safe that you could pass out on the streets and wake up with your wallet, your phone, and other belongings still in your pockets. If you've been to Shibuya or Shinjuku during the nighttime, you have probably seen drunk people sleeping on the streets. There are also people sleeping on public transportations, in restaurants, cafes, and all kinds of places. You'll see people with their bags lying around, their phones and wallets just hanging out of their pockets. If you've heard of Shibuya Meltdown, what I've described here is Shibuya Meltdown, and you can find a lot of funny photos and videos for your entertainment. This is not to tell you to sleep around on the streets or on public transportation, but it's a good way to know that Japan is relatively safe for people. Let's talk about some areas you should be careful of. When you think of Japan travel safety, you would probably be worried about Kabukicho. Kabukicho in Shinjuku is the red light district of Tokyo with countless restaurants and bars. It is generally a safe area if you want to walk around and check out the different places. But there are some things that you should keep in mind as well. If you're walking down the streets of Kabukicho, you'll see a lot of information centers. These are absolutely not your usual information centers, but actually there are places where you ask for escort services and prostitutes. If you were to enter one of these places for their services, bear in mind that you can't just browse. They usually get you to stay and spend money. So it would be best to avoid entering these kind of places. There are also a lot of host and hostess clubs in the Kabukicho area. These are places where you pay a seating fee for high-end drinks in exchange for the company of hosts or hostesses. These places charge you by the half hour or hour with minimum drink purchases. Most places are quite clear with the system, but as time flies, when you're having fun and getting drunk, it can get quite expensive. If you're walking down the streets of Kabukicho, you'll probably also get approached by different staff of different clubs, bars, and services telling you about all the different things that they offer. It's probably best not to follow these people because there has been a rising number of cases where people are put into situations where they have to pay a lot of money for services that they didn't sign up to. A lot of these activities are also in the gray area or entirely illegal, so it's best to avoid them as well. Luckily, there are a lot of patrols in these areas, so when in doubt, you can approach them and ask them for help. Roppongi is another area that you should be careful of. There are all kinds of businesses in this area with some of the best nightlife, but some businesses are also in the gray area. There are cases where people's drinks get spiked in bars or clubs, or cases of being charged more than what is advertised or being targeted when drunk. There are some workers on the streets of Roppongi that approach pedestrians asking them to visit their venues and advertising different services. You might be approached by people selling you all kinds of products and services. If you're in the area, the best thing you can do is just avoid them, ignore them, and walk away quickly. Similar to Kabukicho in Shinjuku area, different workers on the streets in Roppongi tend to target those people that seem to be intoxicated. Just beware of your surroundings, keep an eye out on your drinks, and go to places that you trust when you're in these areas. As long as you're aware of these things, you'll have a good time. As I mentioned earlier, there are different patrols in the Kabukicho and Roppongi area, so again, when in doubt, just go up to them and ask them for help. Alright, let's talk about Nanpa. Although most Japanese people are relatively quiet and reserved, there are certain situations where they tend to get a little bit louder and more confident in approaching strangers on the streets. These situations usually involve them being a little bit intoxicated. You'll see men approaching women on the streets, and it's not that uncommon, especially at night. A lot of the time you can see men asking women if she would like to go grab a tea, coffee, or a drink together. If they're rejected or ignored, the men will likely just head off and look for a new target. This is called Nanpa, the act of hitting on someone. Especially after trains have finished running on the weekends, there are groups of male friends that just stand around chatting up girls. They don't usually mean any harm in most cases and are just looking to have a chat. Like I mentioned earlier, if you're ever feeling unsafe or feeling threatened, don't hesitate to go to the police box and ask for help. All in all, Japan is a very safe country, and like I always say to my guests, as long as you're being a little bit careful and aware of these little things, you'll have a great time in Japan. If you have any questions or need any help with your trip in Japan, be sure to let me know in the comment section down below. As I mentioned earlier, we help with itineraries as well as offer different tours and experiences. If you're interested, check out the description box down below. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it useful, and I'll see you in the next one.